Every Friday and Saturday night, for your dancing pleasure, a Steve Kovic quartet played at Vito's Log Cabin on Route 12. And on those two nights, as Steve himself liked to say, winking over the rim of his rye and ginger, the joint really jumped. Piano, bass, tenor sax, and drums, they prided themselves on versatility. They could play anything, in any style you wanted to name. And to judge from the delight that swam in their eyes, they had no idea of what inferior musicians they were. In the three supporting members of the quartet, this lack of discernment could be excused on the grounds of inexperience or amateurism, or both. But it was harder to condone in their leader, who played the drums. A thick, blunt, blue-jawed man getting on for 40 now. He had been a professional for 20 years without ever quite learning his craft. Artistically awakened and nourished by the early recordings and movies of Gene Krupa, he had spent the only happy hours of his youth in a trance of hero-worshipping imitation, first intently slapping telephone books and overturned dishpans, later using a real set of drums in the sweat and liniment smells of the high school gym, until one June night in his senior year, when the rest of the band stopped playing, the hundreds of couples stood still, and Steve Kovic felt the weight of all their rapture on his wagging, chewing head while he beat it out for 3 solid minutes. But the splendid crash of cymbals with which he ended that performance marked the pinnacle and ruin of his talent. He would never drum that well again. He would never again kindle that much admiration. Nor would he ever again lose his frantic grip on the conviction that he was great and getting better all the time. Even now, at a run-down beer and pizza joint like Vito's Log Cabin, there was a negligent grandeur in the way he took the stand, the way he frowned over the arrangement of sticks and brushes and hi-hat cymbals, and then peered out, beetle-browed, to ask if the spotlight could be adjusted a fraction of an inch before he settled down. And there was elaborate condescension in the way he whisked and thumped through preliminary foxtrots, or handled the gourds for Latin American interludes. Anyone could tell he was only marking time, waiting for the moment when he could tell the boys to cut loose on one of the old-time Benny Goodman jump numbers. Only then, once or twice an hour, did he give himself wholly to his work, socking the bass drum as if to box the ears of every customer in the house, doing his damnedest on snare and tom-tom. He would take off in a triumph of misplaced virtuosity that went relentlessly on until it drenched his hair with sweat and left him weak and happy as a child. The patrons of the Log Cabin on dance nights were mostly high school seniors. It was the corniest band in the world, but the only live music for miles around. Besides, there wasn't any cover, and they'd serve you without proof of age, and the big parking lot was nice and dark. And a smattering of local storekeepers and contractors who sat in a state of constant laughter with their arms around their wives, remarking on how young it made them feel to watch these kids enjoying themselves. There was an occasional tough element, too. Boys in black leather jackets and boots, who slouched in the urine-smelling corner near the men's room with their thumbs in their jeans, watching the girls with menacingly narrow eyes and taking repeated trips to the toilet to comb and recomb their hair. And there were the regulars, lonely and middle-aged and apparently homeless, the single or inadequately married people who came to the Log Cabin every night, music or not, to drink and sentimentalize under the fly-blown, joke-hung mirror of its rustic bar. Not infrequently, over the past 2 years, the dance night crowd had included a party of 4 intensely humorous young adults who belonged to no discernible group at all: the Campbells and the Wheelers. Frank had discovered the place soon after moving to the country, had discovered it in search of drunkenness one night after a quarrel with his wife, and been quick to bring her back for dancing as soon as things were happier. "You people ever been to the Log Cabin?" he had asked the Campbells early in their acquaintance, and April had said, "Oh no, darling, they'd hate it. It's terrible." The Campbells had looked from one to the other of their faces with uncertain smiles, ready to hate it or love it or espouse whatever other opinion of it might please the Wheelers most. "No, I don't think they'd hate it," Frank had insisted. "I bet they'd like it. It takes a special kind of taste, is all. I mean, the thing about the log cabin, you see," he explained to them at last, "is that it's so awful, it's kind of nice." At first, through the spring and summer of 1953, the four of them had come here only once in a while, as a kind of comic relief from more ambitious forms of entertainment. But by the following summer, they had fallen into it like a cheap, bad habit, and it was their awareness of this particular degeneration, as much as any other, that had made the idea of the Laurel Players uncommonly attractive last winter. When the Petrified Forest went into rehearsal, their attendance at the log cabin dwindled sharply. There were other, quieter places to stop for drinks on the way home from the school. And in the long, uneasy time since the failure of the play, they had not come here at all, almost as if to do so would have constituted an admission of moral defeat. But "What the hell," Frank had said this evening after every conversational attempt in the Campbells' living room had petered out and died. "Why don't we all break down and go to the log cabin?" And here they were, a quiet foursome, ordering round after round of drinks, getting up and coupling off to dance, coming back and sitting silent under the blast of the jump numbers. But for all its awkwardness, the evening was oddly free of tension, or so at least it seemed to Frank. April was as aloof and enigmatic, as far away from the party as she'd ever been in the worst of the old days, but the difference was that now he refused to worry about it. In the old days, he might have talked and laughed himself sick trying to win an affectionate smile from her, or trying by sheer vivacity to make up for her rudeness to the Campbells, because that was what it did amount to, sitting there like some long-necked, heavy-lidded queen among commoners. Plain damn rudeness. Instead, he